I don't think a whole lot out of Mississippi State this season. And of course, Vanderbilt being Vanderbilt, nobody expects anything out of them, just kind of in general. When you group in the fact they lost most of their team to the transfer portal this past season, though they did supplement for a lot of guys in the portal as well, I don't think anybody's expecting a whole lot out of any of those teams, especially Vanderbilt at the bottom of the barrel at 16th. Carolina's different, though. Carolina has a lot of reason for you to believe that they can actually do something. They can go to a bowl game. They can win 6 games. They can have players that are going to get drafted, whatever it may be. There's a lot of pieces there for South Carolina. Lenore Sellers as a quarterback, hoping to be as good as advertised and hoping he continues to play at the level that we saw him play in the few little glimpses we got of him last year. Rocket Sanders comes in as a running back, legitimately one of the best running backs in the SEC when he is fully healthy. A complement of guys in the receiver room. We don't know how that's going to work out necessarily, but you got a lot of bodies, you got a lot of experience in that room that hopefully ends up shaking out to be beneficial for South Carolina. Preston and I just talked about this in the last couple of hours. South Carolina's defensive line is regarded as one of the best in the entire country going into this season, where you return guys from the past couple of years and Tonka and Boogie and TJ Sanders and all that kind of stuff, in addition to adding in talent around them as well. DeAndre Jules, Monkel Goodwine, Jerome Simmons, guys like that, to add to an already experienced room, in addition to what you have at the edge spot as well, bringing in Gilbert Edmond, Kyle Kennard, as well as Dylan Stewart coming in as true freshmen. There's a lot of reason to be excited. That's just a few position groups there. We go on and all day long about this, but that's just a few reasons you can be optimistic about South Carolina and what they're going to be this year. Now, again, I don't set the bar super high. I just want to see them win at least six games, get back to a bowl game, because that's a step back in the right direction. Some of you out there think they should win 8 or 9 games. That's fine if you do. I don't know if that's as attainable, but we'll see what happens as the season rolls along. But I just want to make this important distinction that South Carolina should separate themselves from the bottom 3 teams in the SEC, because there's a reason to believe that South Carolina can actually go out there and win some games and actually put themselves in position to make the postseason, as opposed to what I believe Athlon Sports is projecting for the Arkansas, the Mississippi States, and the Vanderbilts of the world, where nobody's really expecting much out of them. We look around South Carolina. That company is pretty interesting as well. Kentucky is 12th. We've talked so much about how big that game is in week number 2 up there in Lexington, from the standpoint, especially from South Carolina, where finding 6 wins is not going to be easy. That is a make or break. Like, if you lose in Kentucky in week number 2, I think we're all looking around saying, man, I don't know. It might be another 5-7 year. You hope it's not the case, but that is a game that you cannot afford to lose. And these are 2 fan bases that I think look across the aisle at each other and say, well, we should beat them. Well, we should beat them. You know what I mean? Like, these are 2 programs that seemed in pretty similar lights, and South Carolina's gotten the better of Kentucky over the past couple of years, including last year here at Williams-Brice Stadium. But that game is of vital importance for South Carolina to win, to make sure that they win what is deemed to be a toss-up game in a lot of ways, and carry that momentum into week number 3 before they get set to take on LSU here in Williams-Brice Stadium. Here's something I don't agree with, though. They've got Florida up at number 11. We've talked a lot about Florida. We've talked a lot about Florida's schedule. And for them to end up in the 11th spot in the SEC, that's probably going to constitute them somewhere around the 5-7 to 6-6 mark. And again, that is a very, very tall ask for this team that has had its own issues this offseason, in addition to playing what is legitimately probably the hardest schedule in the entire country. So I would have probably agreed a little bit more if maybe they were in 13th. And again, South Carolina doesn't have to play them this year, so there's no head-to-head there. But I probably would have thought maybe you put in Florida at number 13, and then maybe Carolina at 12 and Kentucky at 11 if you want to continue on with the way that they have things stacked up so far. But again, maybe the folks over there at Athlon think that Florida is in for a sizable jump in what is very much a make-or-break year for Billy Napier down there in Gainesville. So again, not overly favorable in the way that they look at South Carolina, but hey, maybe that's bulletin board material. Maybe that's what you clip out and poster up there for everybody in the locker room. Say, hey, guess what? Here's one outlet that doesn't believe in us. And trust me, there's going to be more. I think no matter where you look, Carolina is going to be projected somewhere in that 10th, 13th range. As I talked about a couple weeks ago, this is just one example of them being on the lower end of that as opposed to the higher end. But I don't really think there's going to be many people out there that think Carolina is going to be in the top half of the SEC for any reason. They just got to go out there and prove them wrong. And again, as I mentioned a moment ago, when you have so many new things and so many unknowns on this team, that can also be scary, but it can also give you an opening for optimism. And if you're a glass half full kind of person, then maybe that's the route you take, saying, well, you know what? We don't know how good these guys are going to be. Maybe they'll be even better than we expect. If you're glass half full, you look at them and say, okay, well, maybe they're just going to end up being worse than we expect. We don't really know. And again, we're not going to know until the season gets here. So again, not expecting too much in terms of projections for what these various outlets think South Carolina is going to be in year number, 4 under Shane Beamer now. I do think it's interesting to look at the top of the barrel of where Athlon projected the SEC standings to end up here. Georgia's at number 1. That shouldn't really come as a surprise to anyone. I think a lot of people have them penciled in for Atlanta this upcoming year. Texas gets the nod to be in Atlanta, which is a common thought among a lot of people. But as we talked about the other week, that puts a lot of pressure on Steve Sarkisian. To come into a new conference, the toughest conference in football, and be expected to be one of the top 2 teams and play in the conference championship game in year number 1, that is insanely high pressure. I'm not saying they can't live up to it. I'm just saying that's a crazy position for a team to be in going into a new conference for the first time. Ole Miss actually goes up to number 3 here. So Ole Miss, with what they brought in the portal, with how much they've leveraged NIL from the portal and recruiting standpoint, no reason to think they should make the college football playoff. And then Alabama coming in at number 4. That might be the line. That might be how many. That might be the limit on the number of teams that make it in for the SEC. And we'll get to some thoughts on that in a couple minutes here. But, you know, Kalen DeBoer is expected to keep Alabama towards the top. And again, like so many other unknowns across the landscape of college football, we're not going to know until we see the results on the field. But until then, because they're Alabama, you give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, 4th is certainly not an Alabama-esque position if we're talking about overall league standings. But again, as long as you get in the college football playoff, I think that will be acceptable for most people down there or over there, I guess is a better way to phrase it, over there in Tallahassee. Not Tallahassee, Tuscaloosa, sorry. This is just one of many lists that we have been diving into as we navigate the dog days of summer, leading closer and closer to the start of the college football season. Andy Staples of On3 put out a list that I was very, very interested in the other day. His boldest predictions for the 2024 college football season. He deems it calling his shots. 10 predictions for the college football season in 2024. We'll dive into some of those and see if Andy might end up being right as the Extra Point rolls along. Tyler Head along with you on your Monday here on The Game. Welcome back in, Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Monday. Navigating what we love to call the season of lists, talking season. Getting closer to the start of college football in 2024. As I mentioned a moment ago, Andy Staples of On3 put out what he called Calling a Shot, 10 predictions for the 2024 college football season. Preston and I touched on a couple of these the other day, but I do think this entire list deserves a deep dive because there are some really, really compelling things in here. And he starts off red hot by making the claim that this will be the most electrifying season of college football since 2007. Do you remember the 2007 college football season? It is regarded by many, including myself, as perhaps the greatest college football season of all time. And for somebody like me, I was 11 years old at the time, and I watched college football growing up with my dad and, my younger years. 2007 is what really kicked my love for college football into an even higher gear because of how compelling that season was. And that's the interesting thing about 2007 that makes it compelling is the unknown. Because really from week to week, you had no clue what was going to happen. It started off in week number 1 with Appalachian State beating Michigan and what at the time, and is still considered by many, the greatest upset in college football history. And every single week, another domino was falling. You had the curse of the twos where the top two teams just, or one of the second team in the country seemed to lose almost every single week. You had Missouri and Kansas positioned to play for the national championship towards the end of the season. Neither team made it there. You had South Florida. You had West Virginia. You had a ton of teams. Boston College, they were in the mix for the national championship at critical parts of the season that just kept fluctuating. LSU, to show you how crazy the 2007 season was, in the BCS era, where losses couldn't have been more detrimental, a 2-loss LSU team won the national championship after losing in the final week of the regular season to Arkansas. Like, it was just the nuttiest season ever, but it was so entertaining. And that's what makes it so well remembered in people's minds, because of that unpredictability, because every single week you truly had no idea what was going to happen. And that is very much the case that we're getting set to enter with 2024, because we don't know how it's going to work. In the history of college football, when it's come to the change in championship formats, it's been a small change, right? Went from deciding the championship with polls to saying, okay, we're going to do what we can to make sure we get the top two teams playing each other in some kind of bowl game to determine the national champion. To then saying, okay, we're going to decide, let the computers decide. And no matter what two teams it is, they're going to play each other for the national championship. Then we go to the 4-team playoff saying, okay, now instead of computers, it's going to be a committee. Instead of 2 teams, it's going to be 4, which is basically a +1 system. All right, that wasn't that hard to wrap your head around. But now we add 8 more teams in the mix. We added an additional 2 rounds to the postseason. There's no telling what this is going to look like. There's no telling how many teams are still going to be alive in November. There's no telling how many losses you can have to get yourself into the college football playoff. This is truly wide open, and we're not going to know the criteria. We're just going to have to watch it as the week goes along, to where one week you think, oh, man, this team might be out of it, and then go out there and win against a top 25 team, and maybe they're right back in it. Like, it's going to be so unpredictable, so all over the place, and it should be, hopefully, very entertaining. Like Andy Staples said, hopefully as entertaining as that 2007 season was for college football. Right in line with that, you have his prediction, number 2. 5 SEC teams will make it in to the college football playoff. Look, we know more than one SEC team is going to be in. That's a duh. The champion's going to be in as an automatic qualifier, likely as the number 1 seed. There's going to be other teams that get in. Where does that line get drawn, though? I lean a little bit more towards 4, personally, but the fact that there's still that the SEC is still playing only 8 conference games does open up the possibility of more teams getting in because you have less cannibalization. Here's what I mean by that. Let's look at Athlon Sports and the way they projected the finish to the SEC standings. We have Georgia number 1, so let's just go ahead and give them the SEC championship, say they went undefeated. They're in number 1 seed, no question about that. After that, you have Texas, Ole Miss, Alabama, and Missouri. That's your top 5 teams in the SEC. With the way the schedules work, because you only play 8 conference games, so that's less crossover, that's less opportunity to lose, less opportunities for teams to go head-to-head. You could have a realistic scenario where you have Texas, Ole Miss, and Alabama all sitting at 11-1 in positions 2 through 5 in the SEC. Let me take you a little bit further. LSU, the projected number 6 team in the Athlon Sports standings, could theoretically be 10-2. You're telling me a 10-2 LSU team couldn't maybe make their way into the college football playoff? I think that's very possible. Now, these are very extreme scenarios. These require a lot of very specific things to happen for this to work out. But the way the schedules work, it could end up being the case where I think you're hard-pressed to leave a 10-2 team out of the SEC. And if that number 5 team is sitting at 10-2, then I really think there's a chance that that team could get in as well. And again, going into the unknown, we don't know how those are going to work out. We don't know what the criteria is going to be. We don't know where that line in the sand is going to be. So I don't think, and this also depends on what other conferences are doing as well, I don't think predicting 5 SEC teams making the inaugural 12-team college football playoff is really all that crazy, to be honest with you. Number 3 here, and again, we're going to get to all 10 of these as the show goes along here. Andy Staples predicts that Nebraska will be 7-0 as they enter the OSU game in week number 8, or the 8th game of their season. It's not that crazy. It's a manageable schedule. Nebraska is going to start off the season taking on UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa, Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers, and Indiana. All those teams, very manageable. I would say Colorado is probably the toughest game in week number 2. That is in Lincoln, Nebraska. You do have a team that brings in a lot of transfers in Colorado, so they could be better than we think. We'll see about that, and I'll get to Colorado a little bit later on in the in this list here. But I think it's very plausible that Nebraska could maybe be undefeated going into that matchup with Ohio State. This is also another year with Matt Rule, year number 2. And in the history of Matt Rule as a college football coach, that second year has always ended up with a sizable jump. His second year at Temple, they went from 2-10 to 6-6. Second year at Baylor, they went from 1-11 to 7-6. Last year at Nebraska, pretty solid, considering the fact it was year number 1, 5-7. No reason to think that they can't take a sizable jump this year, including maybe, just maybe, getting themselves to be 7-0 heading in that contest against Ohio State in week number 9, because they have a bye week for the Indiana game. But going into Ohio Stadium as an undefeated team, I imagine that'd be big noon Saturday in October the 26th. That could be a really big deal. Now, a lot of that does ride on Dylan Raiola. How will he be as advertised as the number 1 quarterback in this class? We'll have to see. It is worth noting that they only play one defense that was ranked in the top half nationally a season ago in Rutgers. But that is a home game for Nebraska, so that does play in their favor. It's not that crazy of a prediction, to be honest with you. And if Matt Rule can get them to that point, there's going to be a lot of belief out there in Lincoln, Nebraska, that this program might be on its way back to national prominence once again. We'll see. Again, that's a long way off. Mid-October or late October is a long way off. But I don't think it's that crazy of a prediction to say that Nebraska could maybe be 7-0 going into that game against Ohio State. Speaking of brand names, we'll get to Colorado coming up next, as well as a couple more brand names as this list of predictions for Andy Staples continues as we get set for the 2024 college football season. It is Tyler Head. It is Monday. It's the Extra Point here on the Game. Welcome back in. Is the extra point here on the game. Tyler Head along with you here on your Monday. We'll get back into the Andy Staples team predictions for the college football season in 2024 coming up in just a moment. It is our Talking Hardwood segment, and do want to highlight a couple of notable stats from over the weekend in the WNBA. Talked about this a little bit earlier. Angel Reese setting the double-double mark in yet another game, 13th consecutive double-double, which is a new league record. She did that in her team's 84-71 loss to the Seattle Storm over the weekend as she continues to impress in her rookie season. And then, not to be outdone, Caitlin Clark goes out and records the first triple-double for a rookie in WNBA history as two of the highly touted draft picks coming over this season, living up to their reputations and going to go head-to-head for this Rookie of the Year battle. So that is our Talking Hardwood brought to you by our friends over at Georgia Pacific. I want to get back in this conversation about Andy Staples' list of 10 predictions. We'll get to more of these in the next hour as well. Number 4, talked about brand names. Colorado will make a bowl game in 2024. And I get it, Colorado's controversial. Anytime you bring them up, you're either going to have people that love them or hate them, and there's really no in between. And look, I'm not going to be one of these people that sits here and says, oh, I think Colorado is a college football playoff contender. I don't. But a bowl game isn't really all that crazy. Got to give credit where it's due. No matter what your opinion of Deion Sanders is, as a person and as a personality, he knows football. And they overachieved in year number 1. They were only expected to win 2 games at best last year, and they did better than that. Now, did they fall off as the season went along? Yes, absolutely. But they still managed to win 4 games. And to make a jump from 4 to 6 to get to bowl eligibility, it's only 2 games. It's not that crazy of a thought. Now, this Colorado schedule is very, very hard. Even starting off in week number 1 against North Dakota State, who, again, have a history of beating teams at the FBS level. Week number 2, also taking on Nebraska, a team that I just talked about maybe being 7-0 going into that game against Ohio State in week number 9. Colorado State, nip and tuck game a season ago, could be a win there. Baylor, possibly a win there as well. Again, they are in the Big 12 now. This is a wide-open Big 12. So Central Florida, Kansas State, Arizona, Cincinnati, these are all very, very tough teams. But what I know about the Big 12 is sometimes you have teams that jump up there and surprise you to where it's not always status quo or chalk, as we like to say, with how things end up being. So it's not going to be easy by any means, but if they did make it to a bowl game, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'd be overly shocked by it by any means. So we'll see what happens out there with Deion and company. We know Shador Sanders is good. We know Travis Hunter is good. Can rebuilding the offensive line once again in the transfer portal as well as most of the defense be what they need to be successful on a week in, week out basis? We're going to have to see. But I don't think it's that crazy of a prediction to say that Colorado could themselves make a bowl game. Prediction number 5, Miami will play in the ACC title game. Look, the ACC is very wide open outside of Florida State. And again, this is just go to the title game. All you got to do is be in that top 2. No divisions, none of that anymore. Just be one of the top 2 teams in the ACC based on win percentage, and you get to represent in the ACC championship game. Again, I think Florida State's going to get the nod from most people as saying they're probably going to be one of those teams in the conference championship game. But outside of that, Clemson, Louisville, Miami, NC State, and Miami are all within that realm of conversation to be in the conference championship game. And again, a lot of things going to have to happen. A lot of dominoes going to have to fall. But I don't think it's that crazy to say that Miami is one of those teams that could, they themselves, get the conference championship game for only, the second time in program history since they've joined the ACC. They went out there and did a lot of things right in the transfer portal this offseason. They added in Cam Ward, who is perhaps the most sought-after quarterback in the transfer portal, a guy that could have gone to the NFL if he wanted to after, the collapse of Wazoo and the Pac-12 and all that kind of stuff. So they won the quarterback lottery in that regard. Also very underrated, they added in Damian Martinez from Oregon State. who is one of the best rushers in the Pac-12 a season ago. So you add those two guys into your offense, as well as the fact that this is year number 3. This is when things really started for clicking for Mario Cristobal out there in Oregon in his time there. How big is year number 3 going to be for him? We'll see. Again, they should have won an extra game a season ago if they'd not fumbled that one against, Georgia Tech when they should have just kneeled out the clock instead of running the ball. But a lot of reason for optimism down there in South Beach that Miami could maybe be the team to represent in the conference championship game. Prediction number 6, Arch Manning will start at least one game for Texas, but Quinn Ewers will remain quarterback number 1. I don't want to guarantee injuries on anybody, but given his track record, this seems very plausible. Quinn Ewers in 2 years at Texas has missed 5 total starts, including a couple games a season ago where Malik Murphy had to come in and start him at that Kansas State game that ended up being really, really close. So it would not shock me by any means if Arch Manning ends up having to come in and start a game or two for Quinn Ewers. Now, it's important to put in there that Quinn Ewers would still remain quarterback 1. With how physical and tough the grind of the SEC is on a week-to-week basis, especially with somebody that's going to invite a lot of contact like Quinn Ewers, those injuries could rear their ugly heads once again to where maybe he has to sit out a game or two. Not wishing that on him. I'm just saying it's very possible that's a scenario that could happen. But as much hype is around Arch Manning, as many people out there in Texas want to see him take this team to the great heights that it once had, and to be able to say, hey, we got a Manning playing quarterback for us, let's not forget, Quinn Ewers is an early Heisman favorite. Quinn Ewers is projected to go very high in the 2025 NFL Draft. Quinn Ewers has a lot of great aspects to him that he's shown in his time in college football so far. So just because he doesn't have the brand name of Arch Manning doesn't mean he shouldn't be the quarterback out there. He very much is quarterback number 1. And even Arch Manning going out there and playing this year, unless he just sets the world on fire for 500 yards and 7 touchdowns in his one or a handful of starts, whatever it may be, I don't think there's a quarterback controversy out there in Texas. I do think that Arch Manning seems to be content with doing that, is going to have to wait his turn for Quinn Ewers to play out his last year, go on in the NFL draft, and then hand the keys over to Arch Manning to take over for the next couple seasons out there in Austin. But we could see Arch Manning at some point this season if the history of Quinn Ewers getting injured does indeed hold up. Again, I don't wish that on anybody, but given his track record so far, remember, he got hurt in that Alabama game 2 years ago. Many people think that Texas would have been able to beat Alabama in their home stadium in 2022 if Quinn Ewers does not get hurt earlier in that game and is able to finish things out. We'll see what happens. Now, if Arch Manning does go out there and have a good game, say maybe he throws for, 290 and 3 touchdowns, no matter who the opponent is, there's going to be that groundswell of people saying, oh, we got a quarterback controversy. But I really think unless Quinn Ewers just goes out there and plays overtly badly, I don't think he's losing his starting job at any point this season. And again, I don't wish injuries on anybody, but he's not been the most healthy guy in his college career so far. So it is good that you have a viable backup, at least for that we think. We don't know anything about Arch Manning. He's played in nothing but garbage time up to this point in his college career. We don't know if he is worth that 5-star moniker or not. We give him the benefit of the doubt because he is a Manning. He may have the opportunity to go out there and prove that this year in the SEC if he does indeed get the opportunity to start. So again, that's about half the list from Andy Staples of his predictions for the 2024 season. We'll get into some more of those in the next hours. He does have some pretty interesting things that he is predicting for this year. But to wrap up our number 1, I'm going to have to get Dave's thought on this as well. We have a new champion in the Nathan's Famous Hot Dog eating contest, a new holder of the mustard belt for the next 365 days. But it doesn't come without controversy. We'll get into that coming up. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head on your Monday here on The Game.
been out of it for the most part for a long time. But he is roaring back in a way that very few, except me, could have anticipated.
Yeah, it is, and Nesper's still hanging tough. 10 seconds to go, but I think Pat Bertoletti's about to have a Coke and a smile here at Nathan's Famous.
3, 2, 1, put down your hot dog!
A personal best for Pat Bertoletti out here in Coney Island. 2 historic events.
That was the call on Wednesday. The July 4th, Nathan's Famous Hot Dog Eating Contest out there in Coney Island. Patrick Bertoletti with 58 dogs ends up winning the mustard yellow belt for the first time in his career. And this one did not come without its controversy, though. Dave, I'm sure you are very familiar with the fact that Joey Chestnut was not in the running this year due to the fact that he was banned from the contest due to his signing with a rival hot dog company that Nathan's was not happy with. So, and Preston and I had this conversation this morning. Do we put an asterisk next to Pat Bertoletti's mustard yellow belt, given the fact that he did not beat the best eater in the world in Joey Chestnut?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe not for Nathan's per se, but for the contest, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and look, Patrick Bertoletti's been around the game of Major League Eating for a long time, and for those that have maybe watched the hot dog contest for years, he used to have the mohawk and like the Fu Manchu, so he had a distinct look that made him stand out, but he's never been somebody that's ever posed a threat to Joey Chestnut, and just looking at the difference here, you know, going back to Chestnut's world record a couple years ago of 76, like he's not come anywhere close to that. So if Joey Chestnut were in the competition on Wednesday, he would have won pretty handily. And, you know, you look at Joey Chestnut, what he was doing on Wednesday was competing against a couple of servicemen, 4 of them to be exact, and he out-ate those guys in 5 minutes with 57 hot dogs. So he's still at the top of his game, would have gone in there and probably pretty easily won this thing. And again, I hate it for a guy like Bertoletti who's dedicated so much time and so much effort into being a competitive eater that nobody's ever going to view this championship in the same light as if he would have gone out there and legitimately beaten Joey Chestnut straight up.
Yeah, and there's a weather delay too, you know? I mean, just like the race in Chicago. I mean,
right.
It's, you know, so let's, we do give him props for that.
Sure.
And what was the woman that won?
Yes, Miki Sudo actually set the women's record on Wednesday as well with 51 dogs and buns in 10 minutes there. So good for her as well.
Yes, indeed.
And that's actually pretty interesting. Because look, Chestnut was far and away better than everybody in the entire world eating hot dogs. But I would have been interested to see like a head-to-head between like Sudo and Bertoletti. That could have actually been a fun competition this year because they would have had pretty similar numbers there.
Yeah, that would have been why, and I guess we don't do it because women can't eat as much. I mean, is that the idea?
And I imagine so. The women's contest is, what year did they start doing that? 2011, so it's a newer thing. I imagine given the genetic differences, maybe the way that you eat and the capacity that you consume is different between men and women, which is why they decide to split it up. But you could have actually had a pretty interesting competition between those two because her eating 51, that would have clocked her in at third in the men's competition because George Esper had 52 there on Wednesday. But again, she's regarded as the best women's eater in the world right now, has consistently been winning the women's competition for years on end, which again is why people are putting the asterisks next to Bertoletti because, again, Chestnut is still the best eater in the world. People know if he was there, he would have been racing himself and beating his own personal record instead of basically racing everybody else. So it's going to be interesting to see if Chestnut's allowed back next year and if he can win handily his mustard yellow belt back.
Yeah, I can understand Nathan's side, but, again, you got to have the best there,
You do, because I think it skews the narrative of your competition negatively because everybody looks at this and says, well, yeah, but Joey's not there. Exactly. As opposed to, and I brought this up earlier, in 2015, Matt Stoney beat Joey Chestnut straight up. Like, Chestnut was in the competition, Matt Stoney outate him and won. That is a very legitimate title because you beat the best to do it. Mm-hmm. To where next year, if, again, Chestnut returns, nobody's going to look at Bertoletti and say, oh, he's a threat because he won a year ago. Like, no. Chestnut's still going to win. They just have to allow him back in the competition.
Yeah. It's like, what was the year that Auburn went undefeated, but hey,
Yep.
you're not national champion.
2004. So we got into a conversation about that this morning. There's actually a lot of asterisks in sports championships. You have like the Lakers winning during the COVID bubble. They brought up LSU winning the women's national championship last year because they didn't have to play South Carolina again. The Patriots with the Tuck rule and Deflategate and all that kind of stuff. There's actually more than I even thought of it at the first initial thought of asterisks next to championships because of whatever factor. And I think this is going to go up there as one of the biggest ones of but if this would have happened, he probably wouldn't have won.
Yeah, I think so too. I give it an asterisk.
By the way, how many hot dogs and buns could you eat in 10 minutes?
10 minutes?
10 minutes.
3 or 4, I think. No.
That's it?
Yeah, that's it.
Even if you like dip it in water?
Yeah, even so, which I wouldn't do because I wouldn't be enjoying it, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no enjoy. The enjoyment goes out the window pretty fast. Like they're not eating this because they love Nathan's hot dogs. They're eating this to win.
Right. Do they have the puke bucket there?
It's there. I feel like when you've gotten to this point of competitive eating, you probably don't have a problem throwing up. I know there's a dude that threw up during the chugging competition earlier in the day. After that, because they drank I think it's lemonade. They drank like a gallon of lemonade quickly. So you throw up after that, but you don't usually see throwing up after the hot dog competition because I feel like if you've gotten that far in your competitive eating career, you probably have a pretty good wrangle on that to where that doesn't happen because that disqualifies you. Throw up, you just get disqualified basically.
Right,
so you obviously don't want that to happen. But congrats, Pat Bertoletti. Unfortunately, that your championship's not going to be held in very high regard because Joe Chestnut is still the best eater in the world. That'll do it for hour number 1 of the Extra Point. Coming up next in hour number 2, going to get into some thoughts about coaches and how we're going to judge them in this new era of college football, as well as more of Andy Staples' list of 10 predictions that he has for the 2024 college football season. That's all coming up. Hour number 2 of the Extra Point here on the Game. Oh, man, so much happening over the summer here at Twin Peaks as we were navigating through the through the month of July. Next week is going to be the Bikini Costume Party happening between July the 15th and July the 18th. All week long, specials on your favorite summer beverages, including 29-degree draft beers to keep you cool, refreshing cocktails, and cheap shots. Bring the crew and grab a watermelon margarita topped with watermelon Red Bull or Malargo Silver Paloma to beat the heat as well. Summer's also a time of savings. Don't compromise coming to Twin Peaks all week long between the 19th and the 25th and save big on some of your favorite food and beverage items all day long, every single day. Summer savings start today only at your local lodge with our friends at Twin Peaks down in the Vista. Hour number 2, welcome back in. It is the Extra Point here on the Game. Tyler Head along with you on this Monday, navigating 54 days until the start of the 2024 college football season. I guess technically 47 days if you are a Week 0 supporter like myself. So a little over a month away from the new season beginning. And again, next week is SEC Media Days, which we will have full coverage for you here all week long on the Game, including when Coach Beamer takes to the podium coming up a week from today, next Monday. We'll get all the times on that, as well as who will be helping represent South Carolina at Media Days as the week goes along. We talked a lot last week about coaches and how much pressure is on them respectively going into this new season. This is all stemmed from Jesse Simonton, who writes for On3, who put out his list, multiple lists, that is, of the respective Power 4 conferences and which coaches they are going to be under the most pressure going into the season. We spent a lot of time talking about the SEC, spent a lot of time talking about the Big Ten and which coaches are under certain amounts of pressure going into the season, given where their programs are, what the expectations are, and all those kind of things. Again, Coach Beamer was put in that area of high pressure, which I think is fair. Now, that doesn't mean that he's on the hot seat, as some national pundits like to put it. I don't think that necessarily is the case, but there is pressure to get yourself back to the postseason, to get back to a bowl game. Again, I know a lot of people think that that's an unacceptable, not an unacceptable goal to have, but something that, Carolina fans should loft for higher things. But I think if you just get back to a bowl game, you're taking a step in the right direction. Anything that happens past that is certainly gravy. You have, the Sam Pittmans of the world that are under extreme pressure. I even said that, I'd probably group Billy Napier into that same category as well, because those are two coaches that I think we look at going into this season knowing there's a realistic chance they're not coaching their respective programs by the time the season comes to an end. On the Big Ten side of things, certainly can say that a guy like Ryan Day is under extreme pressure because this is his chance to regain control of the Big Ten now that Jim Harbaugh has moved on and Sharon Moore is taking over as the head coach out there at the University of Michigan. But, with the new era, it really does change the way that we evaluate certain coaches. Now, your win-loss record at the end of the day is always going to be a big part of that. Making it to the postseason is always going to be a part of that as well. But with the expanded college football playoff, that opens up the door to even more coaches that are going to be put in the realm of expected to be in the playoff, if not every single year, on a very consistent basis. So when you look at things from a 14 playoff perspective, I'd say there's probably, maybe 3 to 5 coaches every single year that you could have realistically said, no, this is a program that should expect to be in the college football playoff every single year, both based on previous history and based on, the talent that you have on that team. Programs like Georgia, like Alabama, like Ohio State and Michigan in these past couple of years are all programs that expected to be in the college football playoff every single season. And for the most part, that usually ended up being the case. But now that we've expanded the college football playoff, that changes how many coaches we expect to put in that same category in the years going forward. I want to hit this. This is cut number 1. Connor O'Gara, who writes for Saturday Down South, was on the Paul Feinbaum show in the middle of last week. And he talked a little bit about how the evaluation of coaches is going to change in this new era of college football.
It is going to be different. It just is. And, Braden, I think the biggest thing isn't so much are you in the playoff and winning games on a yearly basis, because there are very few coaches who will be able to say that they can do that and that that's the actual expectation. But it's how much does it sting when you get left out? That, to me, I think is going to be really telling. Take a team like Alabama this year. If Alabama does not make it to the 12-team playoff in year one of the Kalen DeBoer era, there'll be a lot of people on the outside looking at this going, wow, this really is a different world that we are living in with Nick Saban off into retirement. And we are looking at now a lot of programs in college football saying, well, man, if you can't make the playoff now, when are you ever going to make it? Lane Kiffin's a perfect example of that. If Lane Kiffin does not lead this Ole Miss team with this schedule into the 12-team playoff, a lot of people will be scratching their heads going, man, he is just not going to get into that tier one of college football coaches. So I do think that we're going to evaluate it more so based on how much it stings when
and I do
you
think
lose,
that is
as opposed to
a good way to put it.
Do.
Because let's see, when you look at what programs have the ability to be in the 12-team playoff, it's quite a few. And again, going back to what I said a little bit earlier, where we're going to be navigating the unknown in college football, there's going to be contenders that come out of nowhere, teams that we weren't really thinking about going into the season that end up being pretty good and put themselves in that mix for the 12-team college football playoff. But going off of what Connor O'Gara said right there, I just want to start with the list of teams that, as he said, if they don't make the college football playoff, are going to be viewed as a major disappointment, a major failure, not only by their own fan base, but by the collective, national media and, people that follow college football as closely as we do. Now, there's a couple programs at the very top that it's very easy, as I said a moment ago, to know that they're going to be expected to be in the college football playoff. Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama are the pretty easy three to go ahead and group in to that category. These are teams that obviously been there and done that, won national championships in recent years, and are routinely in the college football playoff. If they don't make the 12-team playoff, then you're sounding alarm bells saying, what the heck went wrong? Why are we having this issue? Which I think that those three teams should be consistent contenders in the college football playoff for years and years to come. The one uncertainty of that is Kalen DeBoer, if he can indeed keep the team at the level of where Nick Saban had them for so many years. But then you go down the list a little bit, and I thought he brought up a really good point when he talked about Lane Kiffin. Now, Lane Kiffin has never taken a team to the college football playoff. Ole Miss has never been in the college football playoff. But where you look at where that program is right now, what they accomplished a season ago, the best season in program history, what they did in the transfer portal in the offseason, acquiring so much talent, using their collective and NIL to their absolute advantage, perhaps better than anybody else did this entire offseason. And I've said this many times before, I'm penciling them in to my 12-team college football playoff right out of the gate as of right now. Because if they can't make it this year, as Connor O'Gara said, when are they ever going to make it? Now, again, given the history of the program, Ole Miss shouldn't expect to be in the college football playoff every single year. But where they position themselves and what they've done up to this point says, well, there's no reason why they shouldn't be, right? So that is a coach that's going to be expected to be in that position. And if they don't make the playoff this year, it's going to be a major disappointment. It's going to sting quite a bit out there in Oxford, Mississippi with Lane Kiffin. Another program kind of in a similar way that doesn't have a history of making the college football playoff is Penn State. James Franklin, again, is perhaps the best 9-3, 10-2 coach in the entire country. For roughly a decade, outside of the 1 year where they did beat Ohio State and win the Big Ten championship but got left out of the college football playoff, they've routinely been about the third best team in the Big Ten, behind Ohio State and behind Michigan. Now, in a 14 playoff, that's frustrating because if you can't get past those teams, you're not going to get yourself in. In a 12-team playoff, though, 10-2 in the Big Ten should be just fine when it comes to getting yourself into the college football playoff. And yes, while Drew Aller may not invoke the most amount of confidence from a quarterback standpoint, there's still going to be a high level of expectation out there in Happy Valley this year that they're going to be one of those 12 teams. And again, if you go 10-2 or something along those lines, you should be good enough to make it in. Now, again, from a previous record standpoint, there shouldn't be that expectation of, hey, we've never been a playoff team before. Why would we think we're going to be one now? But again, with how you positioned yourself year after year after year, based on what we know, they should be one of those teams that's in the 12-team playoff this year and routinely for years to come. There's going to be a lot of disappointment if they don't end up being there. Sticking in the Big Ten, Michigan and Sharon Moore. I get it. Jim Harbaugh left. You lost a lot of talent from your national championship winning team from a season ago. That being said, Michigan's not just going to suddenly, Michigan fans and Michigan alumni are not going to suddenly say, okay, well, we're cool with going back to being 8-4 and, playing in the Citrus Bowl or something like that. Like, no. If they don't make the college football playoff this year in an expanded field, I think they understand that there's going to be a little bit of a dip compared to where they were a season ago, but shouldn't be that severe, right? You still got a lot of talent, especially on the defensive side of the ball, where you should, at worst, be 10-2-ish, maybe 9-3, which should theoretically still be enough to get yourself in the college football playoff. Again, another fan base that's going to sting quite a bit if they don't end up making it in. Next one, Oregon. Dan Lanning heading into the Big Ten for the first time. Dan Lanning has never taken to the Oregon Ducks to the college football playoff. Oregon has not been in the college football playoff since a decade ago when they played Ohio State for the national championship. But that's a program where they're positioned right now. What they've been doing these past couple of years, the talent that they have on that team should have no problem making it into an expanded 12-team playoff. That doesn't even mean that they go to the Big Ten championship game in year number one. You could be that third team in the Big Ten, as we talked about, and still make your way in. But I think definitively, if the Ducks don't make it in, the folks out there in Eugene are going to be severely disappointed and have a bitter taste in their mouth saying, why can't we be one of the best 12 teams in the country? We should be. And Dan Lanning's building that team to be one of those programs. And lastly, and again, this is just a list of teams that I think would be very shocked and very, surprised to not make the 12-team college football playoff in 2024. I got their Texas in there as well. I mean, they were a couple plays away from playing for the national championship a season ago. Yes, I'm not definitively ready to say that Texas is back as of yet, but they've shown you a lot to give you reason to think that they are going to have another successful season in 2024. Now you're going into a new league, new conference, the toughest conference in college football. There is going to be some growing pains probably. I don't think Texas is going to navigate the SEC schedule undefeated. That being said, as talked a little bit earlier, there's a path for like 5 teams to get into the college football playoff from the SEC. And if Texas is not within one of those 4 to 5 teams, that is going to be a major disappointment and a major shock to a lot of people out there in Austin. So I think Steve Sarkisian is another one of those coaches that gets judged saying, hey, we should be in the college football playoff more often than not, especially this year, given the success that you had a season ago. And if you don't end up making it in there, they're going to be very upset and very surprised because of it. Again, there's going to be teams that come up as the year goes along and as the next couple seasons goes along that we don't expect or don't see coming that are going to make the college football playoff. And by the way, right there, I just named, only 8 coaches. So there's still 4 more slots out there to make it in. So those coaches are going to come and go. But as far as like the nucleus of what should be consistent teams in that 12-team playoff, I think Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, Ole Miss, Penn State, Michigan, Oregon, and Texas should all be those teams that are routinely, if not all of them in, a combination of 6 to 7 of them every single year, routinely in a 12-team college football playoff. And those coaches will be judged on whether they make it or not. We'll switch gears a little bit. CBS Sports put out their own list of toughest places to play in the SEC. How does that compare to the list that EA Sports put out the other week? We'll hit on that coming up. It is The Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Monday here on The Game. Welcome back in. Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Monday on the Game. Appreciate, as always, everybody checking us out on the Game TV. Sponsored by our friends over at Shepherd's Glass and powered by our friends over at Integrated Media. You can watch us all day long on the Game TV. Go back and watch shows that you may have missed as well. The EA Sports College Football video game comes out next week. Very excited for that, by the way. Still got to buy a new console. Have not gotten around to doing that yet, but hopefully I can work that out within the next week or so. And in the lead up to the release of College Football 25, EA has been putting out pieces of info regarding their game, lot of new trailers about specific, the Dynasty mode and the gameplay and all that kind of stuff. And one thing they put out the other week that stirred quite a bit of controversy was their top 25 toughest places to play. Now, this has been a staple of the EA games for many years, and the ranking this year is perhaps the most controversial as ever, highlighted by Texas A&M and Kyle Field being at number 1 on the list. And a lot of people, rightfully so, poke some holes in that thought, given the fact that Texas A&M, since they've joined the SEC, hasn't really been overly dominant at home. They have quite a few losses, notable losses at that, taking place out there at Kyle Field. So a lot of people very hard pressed to think that that's the toughest places to play, tough places to play, especially over the stadiums immediately behind them, like Alabama in Bryant-Denny Stadium and Tiger Stadium down there in LSU. Well, perhaps in a reaction to what we saw from EA Sports, CBS Sports put out their own list of of toughest places to play in the SEC with their own stadium rankings. So this is just 1 through 16 of stadiums within the Southeastern Conference. And I feel like this list is a little more in line with what people would expect when talking about the toughest venues in all of Southeastern Conference. Now, we can expand this conversation out larger to the entire country. That's a little bit of a different story here, but just from looking at 1 through 16, I feel like this list better represents the SEC a little bit more. And this starts off, no surprise, with LSU at number 1. Now, yes, Alabama does have a better record at home, which was part of ESPN's or EA Sports process of factoring in to how they determine this list. But there's just an aura around Tiger Stadium, Death Valley, especially on a Saturday night where they say dreams go to die, that is just really, really hard to beat. You have a stadium that has, 100,000 some odd people that are right on top of you. The sound really doesn't have anywhere to escape necessarily. So it's really hard to make arguments against LSU being number 1. And had they been put number 1 on EA Sports list, I don't think anybody would have had too many problems with that. So CBS, in their mind, correcting their mistake there. Alabama at number 2 makes sense. As I mentioned, the record alone in Bryant-Denny Stadium is just unbelievable. Over the past decade plus, really since Alabama's been on this run with Nick Saban. And while I don't think it pops to the top of mind of everyone when it comes to toughest place to play, because a lot of times Alabama just blows people out to where the atmosphere doesn't have to be rowdy and raucous for all 4 quarters. I think it is, a fit place to put at number 2 on the list. I even made arguments for it to possibly be number 1 on the list when it comes to the EA Sports rankings from a couple of weeks ago. One area that I have a problem with is Florida at number 3. Now, yes, in the heyday of the Florida Gators in the mid-2000s with Tebow and all those guys out there on those powerhouse teams, sure. The Swamp was probably maybe the toughest place to play at that point in college football. Today, not so much. It's not a place that you fear going into as much. Now, yes, South Carolina hasn't had the best record there in the past couple seasons, namely that 38-6 mauling a couple years ago before being the likes of Tennessee and Clemson to close out the season. But I even think a lot of South Carolina fans that maybe made that trip would say it's not as daunting as it used to be back in the old days of the mid-2000s and those Urban Meyer Florida teams. Do you give them the benefit of the doubt to a degree? Sure. But I just don't think this version of Florida and this version of the Swamp is as daunting as it once was back in the day. I'll skip down. South Carolina ends up number 7 on this list, which I feel like, overall, that's pretty respectable. When you talk about where they position themselves as far as the SEC overall, they are right around about the same compared to the EA list, where South Carolina's 15th overall, but 7th out of the SEC teams there. So right around that same regard, I do think that, the fact that South Carolina has not been as super dominant at home. Now, they do have a little bit of a better record at home, especially in night games under Shane Beamer. But it's not a place that people say, oh, well, South Carolina is impossible to beat when they're at home. But in terms of the actual rowdiness and the atmosphere from, getting to experience it firsthand for multiple games a season ago, I can say that, South Carolina should be ranked up there as one of the better venues in all the SEC. And again, I think 7th, just being in the top half of the SEC is certainly worth something and certainly respectable. This is where the controversy really comes in here. Texas A&M at number 8, where EA Sports thought that they were the best. And I get it. You have the L leaders and you have the traditions and all the noise and pomp and circumstance that happens out there at Texas A&M. I don't know how intimidating it is if the program itself is not all that super powerful. And when you think about what the Jimbo Fisher era of Texas A&M football has been, I don't think anybody necessarily looked at A&M and Kyle Field as like, oh, no, we can't go in there and win those games. So, that's probably about right when you think about it. Now, if we're going based on the averages here, that would have netted them around 19th or 20th on the list of the EA Sports toughest places to play if they would have been kind of going off these rankings, which I don't think anybody really had a problem with. I think it has a reputation that precedes itself to a degree, but it's certainly not in the conversation with the Alabamas, the LSUs, places like that, especially when you talk about how successful a team like Texas A&M has been in their home venues, particularly since joining the SEC. They are placed one position, though, above their in-state rival, that being the Texas Longhorns. Now, it does seem like there's a point to this list being made by David Cobb of CBS Sports, because he puts in his headline, newcomers Oklahoma and Texas lag behind legacy league members after conference expansion. So I think the biggest selling point of this article is the fact that Texas and Oklahoma don't automatically come in and be thought of as, the great high-end environments in the SEC. Very good environments. I've never been to Austin. I've never been to Norman, Oklahoma. I think people would say they're regarded as two of the better environments in the SEC. Both these teams reflected in EA Sports list of toughest places to play on the Oklahoma's actually at 8. Texas is all the way down at 19 in that list. But again, still thought it was two of the better venues in all of college football. Again, CBS Sports thinks that's a little bit in the other direction with putting both these teams towards the middle part of the of the SEC in terms of toughest places to play, where I'll be very interested to see how they react in conference games. They can surely make it a hostile and rowdy environment that does hinder other teams that are coming into their respective venues, and if that narrative can change a little bit, because I think people look at a place like Norman as maybe, and then they do like the candy stripe thing with the seating and all that kind of stuff. I think people kind of view that as more of a rowdier environment than Texas has been, at least in the past couple of years. How does coming off of a college football playoff berth or appearance maybe change that for the folks out there in Texas? We'll have to see. I do think maybe that was more of a point to be proven more than anything else, putting these teams at 9 and 10 on the list in the bottom half of the SEC as they come in for their first year. And no surprise, in case you were wondering, Vanderbilt ends up number 16 on the list, as First Bank Stadium is still being finished out there in Nashville, as of course they played under construction the entire 2024 season. I don't think anybody's afraid to go to Nashville, as most opposing fan bases end up taking over the stadium for the most part as well. So again, that's just, and again, we're in the season of list. We're looking at thoughts, we're looking at people's opinions, and CBS has a much different opinion on the toughest places to play as it pertains to the SEC in regards to what EA Sports had a couple of weeks ago. And if you disagree, that's perfectly fine. You can weigh in your thoughts, 803-404-6100, on what you think the toughest places to play in the SEC actually are compared to this list that CBS Sports did put out. I want to get back into Andy Staples' 10 predictions for the 2024 college football season. Which extreme ones does he still have left in the tank as we roll through the extra point? Tyler Head along with you on your Monday here on The Game. Welcome back in. Extra Point, Tirehead with you on this Monday. Going to jump back into the conversation we were having a little bit earlier. Andy Staples of On3 put out his 10 predictions for the 2024 college football season. Got through 1 through 6 in hour number 1. Going to hit the last 4 here to wrap up today's edition of the show. We'll move on to number 7, where he says the 2024 Heisman Trophy winner will start the season with a plus 2,000 or larger betting line. This is very interesting because we always think we know who the subjects of the race for the Heisman Trophy are going in to the season. And a lot of times the winner does usually end up kind of coming from that mold of, 5 to 6 guys that we think are going to be in that conversation. Your Caleb Williams, your Jaden Daniels, guys like that in the past couple of years that no surprise to anyone that they went on to win the Heisman Trophy. But sometimes you have guys that really come out of nowhere. Go back to Joe Burrow in 2019. Nobody saw him as having one of the best seasons for a college football quarterback of all time, making his way to New York. Nobody saw Devonta Smith with Alabama in 2020. Now, given 2020 was a really weird year, but a wide receiver of all people winning the Heisman Trophy, nobody saw those kind of things coming. So these kind of things can happen at times with guys with longer odds to end up winning the Heisman Trophy. So you have your usual suspects at the top with pretty short odds. Carson Beck, Quinn Ewers, Dylan Gabriel, those guys are listed, depending on what publication you're looking at, between plus 800 and plus 1,000. So pretty good odds to win the whole thing. Jalen Milroe is in that 1,000 to 1,500 range, so still pretty good odds for him as well. Even a Jackson Dart is listed between, 1,600 and about 2,000 himself. But it gets really interesting the deeper down this list you go, and some of the names that are at that 2,000 and plus listed odds that could be serious factors for the Heisman Trophy when the season's done with. I look at a guy like a Cam Ward, where at best he's plus 2,000, depending on, again, what website and what book you're looking at. Some of them have him as high as 2,200, plus 2,200. So he's somebody that, again, I think was perhaps the best quarterback out of the portal this year, going to a place in Miami with viable weapons around him. He could put up some ridiculously good numbers, and he could be the reason why Miami gets themselves into that conversation of maybe being a playoff team themselves. I don't think it's that crazy to envision that he could maybe be in the mix for the Heisman Trophy. Somebody else. This guy's returning from injury out there in Kansas at 4,000 at plus 4,000 odds. Jalen Daniels, not Jaden Daniels, Jalen Daniels, the quarterback of the Kansas Jayhawks, who only got to play a handful of games season ago, but showed out exceptionally well in those games before getting injured. Now, Kansas did end up still having a pretty good season, all things considered, but with Jalen Daniels coming back at full strength, especially in a wide-open Big 12, this could be a very, very good year for him out there in Lawrence, Kansas. And I'll throw in another one as well. How about Noah Fafita out there at Arizona? He's listed as far as plus 4,000. Some of them have him at plus 2,500. He had an exceptional freshman year out there in Arizona under Jed Fish. Now, Jed Fish has obviously moved on to the University of Arizona, but Noah Fafita has an opportunity to go out there and once again in a wide open Big 12 to maybe show out and put himself in the mix for the Heisman Trophy when it's all said and done at the end of the season. Prediction number 8. Baylor's coach Dave Aranda will be this year's version of Neil Brown. For those that don't remember, Neil Brown at West Virginia was entering the season on the hot seat in 2023. They had one winning season in the prior 4 years. People were saying he's going to get run out of town before the season even ends. They lost game number 1 last year against Penn State, and people were saying, all right, that's it. It's going to happen sooner rather than later. They proceeded to go 9-4 last year and make it to a bowl game, and he saved his job with their performance a season ago. Dave Aranda out there in Baylor is somebody that's a victim of having success too fast. Came in there and in just his second year won the Big 12 championship and the Sugar Bowl in 2021. Since then, they've been sub 500 and are projected to be about 6-6 this season. However, do have some things going for them as a reason why they could maybe take a step back in the right direction. And again, we're not saying that they're going to go out there and win the Big 12 championship. We're not saying they're going to make the college football playoff, but just do good enough to where people aren't talking about Dave Aranda possibly being fired out there in Waco when the season is said and done. They were 101st in scoring offense a season ago. They bring in Jake Spavital at offensive coordinator, who in one season out there in Cal last year improved what was in 2022 a team that was 96th overall on offense to 48th. He made a sizable jump with that offense a season ago and is expected to do the same thing out there in Waco with the Baylor Bears. They also bring in DeQuan Finn from Toledo, who was the best overall quarterback in the MAC, won the league's most valuable player award with the number one offense for the Rockets out there in the MAC. So you bring in a good quarterback, you bring in a coach that in Spavital that brings in a more of a spread option to the offense that has a record of bringing dormant offenses back into a little bit more respectability. I think Baylor could be set up for a lot of success this upcoming year. And again, I'm not saying they're going to play in the Big 12 championship game, but do enough to where we're not talking about Dave Aranda being on the hot seat when the season does come to an end. Number 9, the most productive tailback duo in the country likely will be at Ohio State, but don't count out a pair of transfers at Missouri. So what Andy Staples talks about there, Trevion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins are the running back pair up there in Ohio State. They combined for over 2,000 yards and 26 touchdowns on the ground a season ago. They're definitely going to be, barring injury, of course, knock on wood, nobody gets injured there. They're definitely going to be the premier running back duo in the country in 2024. And I brought this up last week when we were talking about Eli Drinkwitz and what his pressure level is at Missouri this year after surprising a lot of people with how good they were a season ago. A lot of that riding on how good of a running back Cody Schrader was coming in from Division II Truman State. Cody Schrader's gone off the NFL now. What do you replace him with? They went out in the portal and they got Marcus Carroll from Georgia State and Nate Noel from Appalachian State. Carroll rushed for over 1,300 yards a season ago with 13 touchdowns. Noel rushed for 834 yards and 5 touchdowns a season ago while missing 2 games. So if he goes out there, plays on his average, then you're probably talking about 2,000-plus yards back and 1,000-plus yard backs, and Nate Noel probably has 7 or 8 touchdowns if he plays the full season a year ago. So some very high production from 2 guys that, yes, were playing at the Sun Belt level, but still 2 of the best in their respective leagues a season ago. And the biggest thing for me of why this prediction could come true is because of the offensive line that Missouri has. People forget that offensive line was a Joe Moore finalist a season ago. They were regarded as one of the best offensive lines in all of college football and paved the way for Cody Schrader to have some of those huge holes to run through as we saw him do against South Carolina back in October of last year. So that is just as important of a thing when you talk about how successful your running backs are going to be is how good your offensive line is as well. And they returned 3 of their 5 starters from that Joe Moore finalist offensive line a season ago, in addition to adding in these 2 good running backs. And again, I'm not saying that either one of these guys is going to be in the Heisman ceremony at season's end, but as Andy Staples is predicting, I think they could be a very, very legitimate running back duo, not only in the SEC, but in the country as well. We'll hit Andy Staples' final prediction. This has to do with college football playoff and group of 5 teams, and wrap up today's edition of The Extra Point. Coming up next, it is The Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Monday here on The Game. Welcome back in. Extra Point, Tyler Head with you here on the game on your Monday. We'll get into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs coming up at 11. Wes and Chris will dive into some commitments and decommitments for South Carolina that happened over the course of your extended holiday weekend. But wrapping up here on the Extra Point, want to close out Andy Staples' list as we've been going through Andy Staples of On 3 and his 10 predictions for the 2024 college football season. And this one, to me, number 10, is perhaps one of the most intriguing, where he says Liberty will go undefeated but be left out of the college football playoff. Now, the group of five, we know, is a different level of football than the Power Five, Power Four, whatever you want to call it. Like, that's just a given. And for the long history of the BCS, they never really gave all that much favor to the group of five teams before that was even called Group of Five. We never had one of them play in the national championship, no matter how good a respective Boise State or Hawaii team going undefeated ended up being, because it was the thought that they're not powerful enough to compete with some of the best teams in the country and play for a national championship. The college football playoff has been very much a lot of the, has been a lot of the same way. You know what I mean? With the ability to throw the bone to the group of five by saying, we'll take what we think is your best conference champion and let them play in a New Year's Six bowl game. I've long held the belief that, once you get outside of the top 5 or 6 in the 4-team college football playoff rankings, the committee really doesn't care. You know what I mean? To where they're not putting a ton of thought into who that group of 5 team is. Now, some years where it goes without saying that, like Tulane, yes, was the best group of 5 team. Cincinnati, when they won or when they made it in the 4-team playoff, they were the best group of 5 team that year. But a lot of years they're just kind of saying, okay, we have to have one to have one, and they're not vetting that as toughly as they should. And a lot of people had problems with the fact that Liberty did go undefeated last year, won the Conference USA championship, but had an extremely weak schedule up to that point. They played Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl and got completely decimated by them last year. So Liberty, once again, setting up to have one of the weakest schedules in all of college football. Very realistic possibility they could end up going undefeated this season. If that being the case, would that be enough to get them in to the college football playoff? I don't think so. Because I do think, and I know season to season isn't supposed to matter, but I do think the playoff committee will look at something like what happened last year in the Fiesta Bowl and say, oh, wow, Oregon dominated this Liberty team. We probably should think about somebody else going in that can put up a fair fight. Because that's the thing. What was the biggest knock on the 4-team college football playoff was that so many of the semifinal games and sometimes the national championship game ended up just being these dominant blowouts that weren't very entertaining. The college football playoff is a made-for-TV product. They want to make sure they're putting in the best teams that are going to give you compelling, entertaining matchups that give an incentive for the audience to stay tuned the entire time. So if you let a Liberty in there as the 12 seed, and they're taking on an Alabama or an Ohio State or whoever ends up being that number 5 seed, they're probably going to get run out of the building if it ends up being as weak of a team as they had a season ago. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. Is the best way to put it, because they want to put in a team that is capable. Now, the Group 5 team, more often than not, is probably still going to lose that matchup just based on talent disparity, strength of schedule, and all that kind of stuff. But I think occasionally, if you have a team that is strong enough, I look at a team like Boise State that does play an actual pretty decent schedule this year, and if they were to navigate that and, come away, 11-1 or something along those lines, then I think they would be more of a viable option to put in there as opposed to an undefeated Liberty. So again, looking at Boise State's schedule this year, they play Oregon, they play Oregon State at the end of the regular season. Like, they play some decent opponents throughout the course of the year. Washington State as well, in that little quasi-agreement the Mountain West has with the former Pac-12 as far as scheduling goes. And if they can win 2 of those 3 games, or even just look competitive against a team like Oregon, that might be enough to get them in to the college football playoff. The main point of all this is those group of 5 teams, because again, we aren't always guaranteed that these group of 5 champions will have seen each other at any point during the season. So you're really having to compare, resumes to determine which of them is going to be the best and which of them is going to have the opportunity to play in the college football playoff. So I do think that your scheduling is going to matter a whole lot, to where you can't just go undefeated and think that's going to be enough to get you in to the college football playoff. You're going to have to put up legitimate results. You're going to have to look good against teams that you might end up losing to, but you're rewarded for playing those teams. So I think a team like Boise State is very much in line with having the ability to make it in to the college football playoff, as opposed to a Liberty team that might still go undefeated, might win the Conference USA championship, but just does not have the strength of schedule to fall back on to make their way in to the college football playoff. And that goes back to something that I said a little bit earlier that really kind of is the main point of this entire college football season, is that there's so many unknowns. We don't know the exact criteria. We don't know how the committee is going to view things with an expanded format like they've done in years past. We figured out, for the most part, what to expect with 14 playoff, to where when you went into that final Sunday, Selection Sunday after the conference championship games, you usually had a pretty good idea of who those 4 teams are going to be based on what the precedent had been set in years past was with the 4-team college football playoff. This year's a complete unknown. This year, we truly have no idea what that line's going to be. We know if you're a Power 4 champion, you're going to be in. As an automatic qualifier, you're going to get a first-round bye. Everything past that is completely open to interpretation. We think that multiple SEC and Big Ten teams are going to get in. We assume maybe 1 or 2 extra Big Ten or ACC teams are going to get in, and 1 group of 5 team is going to find their way in just by virtue of being the highest-ranked non-power conference champion. But again, it's all speculation. We don't truly know. And that is going back to the number 1 prediction by Andy Staples of On3 with his 10 predictions list. That is what makes the season so intriguing. Is that unknown? Is that curiosity of figuring out how this is all going to work out, figuring out what teams are going to be in the mix, figuring out what dominoes are going to fall and how that affects things from the college football playoff standpoint, in addition to the fact that we have new conferences, new alignments, new teams in new places to see how they respond within their respective conferences. It's all wide open. And I'm very, very excited to see what's going to happen over the course of the 2024 college football season. So, again, took a lot of time with that today with Andy Staples' predictions for the 2024 season that I think are pretty legit. I think a lot of those could certainly end up coming to fruition, and we'll have to see that over the course of the season and how all that plays out. But that'll do it for today's edition of The Extra Point. Coming up next, it is going to be the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Wes Mitchell and Chris Clark will come in here, like I mentioned a few minutes ago. Going to talk about some decommitments as we did finally lose Shamari Earls as was expected, and also another welcome home over the weekend from Shane Beamer as well. We'll dive into all of that coming up in the 11 o'clock hour here on The Game.